Sometimes we think that if we don't speak up, we'll be forgotten. That if we don't shout, we won't be heard. But I've come to learn that silence is not absence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not retreat. Sometimes silence is strategy. Silence is wisdom. Silence is strength wrapped in stillness. There's a kind of silence that comes when your spirit knows that you've said enough, you've tried enough, you've proven enough, you've shown up, done the work, poured out your heart, and now it's time to sit back and let the silence do the talking, because what you don't say sometimes speaks louder than every word you could have said. Silence is a form of strength, not weakness. That truth can feel counterintuitive, especially in a world that equates visibility with value and volume with victory. From an early age, we're taught to speak up, to advocate for ourselves, to defend what's ours, and to make noise if we want to be noticed. But there's a deeper strength, one that doesn't need a stage or a spotlight. It's the kind of strength that when to preserve energy, when to let silence speak for you. It takes strength to stay silent when every part of you wants to explain, justify, or retaliate. It takes restraint to bite your tongue when you know you could say something that would cut deep, shift the narrative, or shut the whole situation down. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you've learned that your peace is more important than winning the moment. Real strength is not about proving yourself. It's about knowing yourself. And when you know who you are, you stop wasting energy on things that don't align with your purpose. There's strength in silence because it shows emotional maturity. It reveals that you're not controlled by your triggers, that you don't have to give every insult or response or every accusation a reaction. You know who fights your battles. You know where your help comes from. You're not trying to control the outcome with your words because you trust the one who's already written the ending. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet aren't the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones who've walked through fire and learned to keep their composure. The ones who've endured betrayal, loss, misunderstanding, and rejection, but didn't let it steal their dignity. They could have exploded, but instead they chose silence. That's not weakness, that's wisdom wrapped in self-control. Strength in silence also looks like discipline. It's the ability to pause before reacting, to pray before posting, to listen before responding. In those moments, you're not just holding your tongue, you're holding your power. You're choosing not to let someone else's chaos disturb your calm, and that discipline builds character. It creates space for you to respond with purpose instead of reacting out of pain. Sometimes we mistake silence for powerlessness, but the truth is silence often shifts the atmosphere more than shouting ever could. Have you ever walked into a room where someone said nothing but their presence said everything? That's strength. When you're so grounded in who you are, you don't have to beg for respect. You command it by how you carry yourself. You don't need applause to validate you. You don't need agreement to feel affirmed. Your strength isn't in being seen, it's in being solid. Silence also requires trust. You have to trust that even if no one else sees, God sees. Even if they misunderstand, God understands. Even if it feels like you're being overlooked, you are never unseen. And when you trust that, you can stop striving to be heard and start settling into peace. Peace that doesn't depend on external validation. Peace that comes from knowing that your voice has value even when it's not being used. In a noisy world, silence is a radical act, it's countercultural, it's powerful, and it's reserved for those who have learned that their identity is not tied to their voice being the loudest, but to their soul being the strongest. That kind of strength can't be faked. It's earned in the quiet, formed in the fire, refined through experience. And when you have it, you'll know you don't need to say a word to be powerful. Not every battle requires a response. Some require faith. That truth can be hard to swallow, especially when everything in you wants to speak up, defend yourself, or prove a point. When you've been wronged, misjudged, or misunderstood, it feels like silence is surrender. But real discernment is knowing which battles are yours to fight and which ones are God's to handle. Every situation doesn't deserve your energy. Every accusation doesn't deserve your explanation. Every attack doesn't need a counterattack. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand still and let your silence say, I trust God more than I trust this moment. You're not ignoring the situation. You're inviting a higher authority into it. You're saying, I don't have to prove myself because my character will speak for me. My fruit will speak for me. That's faith in action. That's believing that vindication doesn't have to come from your hands or your mouth. It can come from your obedience. When you start living from that place, you stop wasting strength on distractions. You don't respond to every rumor. You don't chase down every lie. You don't spend your nights rehearsing what you wish you said. You sleep in peace because you've chosen faith over frustration. You've chosen rest over retaliation. You've chosen to believe that what God is doing in your life doesn't require everyone's understanding or approval. Faith allows you to see beyond the now. It reminds you that God sees the full picture while you're only looking at a single frame. So when it feels like you're being walked over, overlooked, or underestimated, faith whispers, stay still, keep trusting. This isn't the battle you need to win. Some of the battles you're facing aren't even about what's happening in the natural. They're about what God is doing in your spirit. He's stretching your trust. He's testing your patience. He's teaching you how to fight without using your fists. We live in a culture that celebrates instant clapbacks and quick comebacks, but spiritual maturity looks like restraint. It looks like knowing you could say something, but choosing not to. Not because you're weak, but because you've learned that silence can be a weapon when placed in the hands of God. The battle isn't always about being right. It's about staying righteous. And righteousness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches, sometimes it walks away. There are seasons where God will ask you to stay quiet, not to punish you, but to protect you. He's not silencing you because you don't have a voice. He's silencing you because your voice is powerful, and He doesn't want it wasted on battles that don't matter in the long run. When God is preparing you for something greater, He'll train you in the art of choosing your battles wisely. You'll begin to realize that peace is too expensive to trade for the temporary satisfaction of proving a point. You don't have to clap back. You don't have to get even. You don't have to post your side or defend your name. If you trust God, He'll make sure the truth rises in time. He'll bring clarity to confusion. He'll bring justice to wrongs. He'll bring honor to the places where you were dishonored. But you've got to trust Him enough to stay silent while He works. Faith isn't passive, it's powerful. It takes courage to walk away from conflict knowing that God is your defender. It takes strength to keep moving forward while others try to pull you back into battles you've already outgrown. And it takes deep trust to let your actions speak louder than your arguments. When you respond with faith, you allow God to do what only He can do, and He never loses a battle. God often works the most in seasons of stillness. It's in those quiet in-between moments when it feels like nothing is happening, when the doors are shut, when you're prayers seem unanswered, that something sacred is taking place beneath the surface. We don't always recognize it because we're so used to associating progress with motion, but stillness isn't the absence of movement, it's the presence of divine preparation. When God brings you into a still season, it's not because He's forgotten you, it's because He's forming you. He's stripping away distractions, peeling off the layers of old identities, and healing the parts of you that hustle tried to hide. You may feel like you're standing still, but spiritually you're being repositioned. You're being grounded. You're being recalibrated for the next assignment, the next elevation, the next version of who you're called to be. Stillness is uncomfortable for those who've been taught that productivity equals worth. We measure our success by how full our calendars are and how fast we're climbing, but God measures growth by how deeply we're rooted. You can't be deeply rooted if you're always on the run. There are things you can only hear in the stillness. Truths about yourself, whispers from God, instructions for your next step. The noise of life can drown out what matters most, but when things get quiet, clarity comes. It's in the stillness that God reveals what's been buried under the busyness, the insecurities you've ignored, the fears you've dressed up as ambition, the wounds you've numbed with activity. Stillness isn't always peaceful, it can be painfully revealing. But that's the point. God isn't trying to punish you. He's trying to purify you. And some of that purification can't happen while you're on the go. You've got to sit in it, feel it, surrender to it, and let God do the work. Sometimes the silence is not a void, it's a vault. A vault where God is protecting what He's developing in you. He's hiding you not because you're unworthy, but because you're valuable. Diamonds don't form in the spotlight. They're created under pressure in hidden places over time. So if it feels like no one sees you, if it feels like your purpose is on pause, understand this. God is not delaying you. He's maturing you. When you learn to embrace the stillness, you stop forcing things that aren't meant to be. You stop rushing ahead of grace. You stop demanding answers and start trusting timing. And in that trust, you find peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've realized that growth is still growth, even if no one else can see it yet. Think about how seeds work. Once they're planted, they disappear. There's no applause, no visibility, no instant gratification, but while buried, they're transforming, breaking open, creating roots, getting ready to push through the soil, and when they do, everyone sees the bloom, but they don't see the silent struggle beneath it. You are that seed. What feels like isolation might just be incubation. Stillness is sacred because it allows you to realign your heart, to ask the questions you've been too busy to ask, to rediscover the voice of God without it having to compete with everything else. And the beauty is, once you've experienced the transformation that happens in the quiet, you stop fearing it. You begin to welcome it because you know the silence isn't empty. It's full of purpose, full of preparation, full of God. Your presence and fruit will speak louder than your words. We live in a world where people are quick to speak, eager to explain, and constantly trying to prove themselves. But there is a quiet confidence that comes when you know you don't have to talk about what you carry. You simply have to walk in it. Your presence alone can shift a room. The way you show up, the energy you bring, the peace that follows you, that speaks volumes. You don't have to over-explain yourself to be understood. You don't have to broadcast every move to be validated. When you've done the internal work, when you've been through the fire and come out refined, you stop needing applause for every step forward. Instead, you let your fruit, the evidence of your growth, do the talking. Fruit doesn't argue, it just shows up. It's undeniable. You have to tell people you've changed when the change is visible in how you live. how you respond, and how you love. There's something powerful about a person who doesn't have to speak loudly to be heard. They just walk in the room with grace, and something about them commands attention, not through ego, but through authenticity. They don't have to say, "Look at me," because their life already says, "God's been with me." That's the power of presence. When you carry peace, resilience, and wisdom in your spirit, you don't have to demand a the room makes space for you. And when it comes to fruit, it's not about perfection, it's about consistency. Are you loving people well? Are you walking in integrity when no one's watching? Are you showing kindness in places where bitterness would be easier? That's fruit, the kind that grows when you've been connected to the vine, when you've stayed rooted even in hard seasons. People may not always understand your silence, but they'll recognize your fruit, and fruit always speaks the truth. There's a lot of noise out there, people branding themselves, defending themselves, trying to be seen, but there's something special about letting your life unfold without having to narrate every moment. You just keep doing the work, keep showing up, keep healing, keep growing, and eventually the fruit will make it impossible to ignore what God is doing in your life. You don't have to compete. You don't have to convince. You just have to stay faithful. Your presence becomes powerful when it's rooted in purpose. It's not about being the loudest or most noticed. It's about being authentic, being aligned, being grounded in who God says you are. When you know your worth, you don't walk in rooms needing approval. You walk in rooms aware that you're already accepted, already equipped, already enough. And that awareness creates a presence that's impossible to fake. People will notice the way you carry peace in chaos. They'll see the grace you extend when you've been wronged. They'll watch how you respond when you're overlooked, how you keep serving, keep sowing, keep showing up, not for applause, but because it's who you are. That's the kind of fruit that testifies. That's the kind of fruit that speaks even when you're silent. You don't have to speak on every misunderstanding or defend every decision. Let your life speak. Let your healing speak. Let your consistency speak. Eventually, what's real will reveal itself. And the people who are meant to see it will. Because when your presence carries the weight of your journey and your fruit bears the evidence of your faith, you won't have to say much. Your life will be the testimony. Silence cultivates clarity, maturity, and spiritual growth. In a world overflowing with opinions, noise, and distractions, it can be easy to lose your sense of direction. You start chasing the loudest voices, comparing your pace to others, and questioning your worth when you feel unseen or unheard. But silence has a way of stripping all that back. When the noise fades and you're left with just you and God, something begins to shift. You start hearing what really matters. You begin to see beyond the surface. You find clarity not just about your circumstances, but about yourself. Clarity doesn't come from more talking. It comes from more listening. Not just listening to others, but listening to God, listening to your soul, and listening to the truth you've been trying to avoid. Silence exposes what noise tries to cover. It shows you where you're really at. It confronts the clutter in your heart. And while that process can feel uncomfortable, it's necessary for growth, because you can't become who you're called to be if you're always drowning in distractions. Maturity is born in the quiet. It's developed in the moments when you want to react, but you choose to reflect. When you feel the urge to speak out of pain, but instead you pause and pray. It's in those silent decisions, those unseen victories, that your character is built. Maturity isn't about age or appearance. It's about how you handle the spaces where silence demands discipline. When you learn to sit with your emotions instead of projecting them. When you learn to wait on God instead of rushing ahead. That's growth. That's wisdom being formed in the soil of silence. Spiritual growth doesn't always look like shouting praise from the mountaintop. Sometimes it looks like whispering yes in the middle of the valley. It's often in the stillness that God does His deepest work in you. He begins to pull out the weeds of insecurity, fear, pride, and doubt, not with loud declarations, but with gentle conviction. When you quiet the noise around you, you begin to hear His voice more clearly. Not the one filtered through performance or pressure, but the one that speaks directly to the hidden places of your heart.